So my name is Anneliese Feld, and I am running for the Washington State House of Representatives in the 2nd Legislative District. If you would have asked me at the beginning of this year, this is what I was going to be doing, I would have probably laughed at you. I have a 1-year-old at home, a 4-year-old at home. I'm writing my doctoral dissertation, and I'm helping my husband start a small business. None of that really says, hey, let's go run for office. I've got a ton of spare time. But as I started turning on the news more and more, everyone knows that the national news is just a circus, but it's also at a local level. I started noticing a lot of issues going on a local level. And I just didn't feel like I was being represented by my representatives in my district, and that was not okay with me. And especially when I'm turning on the news, and the most uplifting news that I'm hearing are children begging adults to save their lives. Just think about that for a second. That's the best thing on the news that I have been seeing lately. Children coming together, using their own agency, begging for their elected officials to do things to save their lives. As a mother, as just a human being, that's wrong. And when I looked at my opponent's voting record, he's part of the problem. He voted against bump stock bans. And that's just the beginning of some very poor choices that I feel like he has been making lately. Conversion therapy was one of them. There was also all of the wonderful things that Mary Hall talked about with voting rights. He voted against all of those. And you have to ask yourself, why would you not want people to vote? I think everyone should vote. That is what our government is built on. And if you're going to vote for me or not, I still want you to be able to exercise that right. And the fact that people are in office and want to suppress votes is a problem. Another issue that affects everyone in here in reality is women's health. Because whether or not you're a man or a woman, you got here from your mother. And prenatal care is very important. Women's health is every person's issue. And he has voted against women's access to health. And I don't think that he would like it very much if we were getting in the way of men's health. There are a lot of different legislations that we could talk about. I believe Yanah informed me of a law in Texas that was proposed about banning masturbation. So, if we want to, it's pretty much on par with getting in the middle of women and their health. Kind of an interesting way to go about it, but it shows how absurd those kind of legislation that he's proposing are. And so those are kind of the issues that I am up against that really made me feel like, even though I have a million things going on in my life, my dissertation will be finished this year, my children are getting older, they're going into school. I want to know that when I send my children to school, I'm not sending them to a war zone. Because the reality is that here in Yelm, the Yelm High School had an issue. Graham Kapowson had a shooting. I myself went to Spanaway Lake High School, and I was on lockdown because a man was on campus with a gun. And that was all the way back in 2004. This is an issue that has been going on for decades now, and no one is addressing it properly. And we should all be ashamed of ourselves for not making that a bigger issue. So that's why I'm running, and I hope that you guys help me to overcome the people that are in office right now that are not dealing with these issues.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tamborine Borelli, and I am running for Washington's 10th Congressional District. I am running against the incumbent, Denny Heck. Just going to tell you a little bit about my background and why, in fact, I am choosing to get into the arena of politics. Before 2016, I had nothing to do with politics whatsoever. I didn't believe that politicians actually had our best interest at heart. And I only say that because every time I would hear a stump speech, it would never come to fruition. So I never wanted to lend my time or my energy, my heart and my soul to any campaign. Of course, until Bernie Sanders came on the scene, I saw a window of opportunity there that things could be different, that there actually was a politician that cared deeply about everyday people's lives. So I threw myself all the way in. I opened a campaign, a volunteer office in Yelm. I became a deputy field organizer for the Sanders campaign, a caucus site leader, and a national delegate. Fast forward, I'm running because we have a crisis in this country. We have a Congress that is compromised by way of legalized bribery through the unending pouring in of money from lobbyists. Corporations control our government. Profit is always put before the interests of the people. So I'll say this, that currently our campaign, I'm very proud to say, has been endorsed by 5 local chapters of our revolution. We have been nominated to national. I am actually one of the candidates that have signed 2 contracts. One is the CFAR contract, which is Contract for American Renewal, and CWAC, Candidates with a Contract. And basically what that says, and personally I think it should be the standard that every candidate and incumbent should be held to, saying that whatever I campaign on, whatever issues, Medicare for all, election reform, the gamut, that when I am elected, if I do not indeed follow through with sponsoring or co-sponsoring that legislation that inspired you to vote for me, within the first 180 days of being in office, the 181st day, I will resign. That, I believe, is what we should, yeah, you can clap for that. Because think, what if everyone that was in Congress now, or any elected official, was held to that standard? No longer would we have fork-tongued politicians that tell us one thing to get us involved, to give them our money and our time and our belief, and then get into office and do nothing to change everyday people's suffering. So I'm proud to say that I am one of those candidates, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you so much for inviting me to come.
My name is Pete Hammer. I'm here to speak on behalf of Brennen Bailey, who's running in the 20th district down in Lewis County and parts of Thurston County and Cowlitz. First, I want to talk about myself just for a moment. I started the Lewis County Indivisible Activists about a year ago, inspired by Bernie Sanders also. And so that's why I got involved with his campaign. What I want to ask is a question real quick. How many of you here live in Grand Mound, Rochester, Tenino, or Bucota? Raise your hands. Okay, we got one. Okay, how many of you know someone who lives in Grand Mound, Rochester? Okay, good, I'll talk to you then too. In Bald Hills, yeah. So the 20th comes up into Thurston County just a little bit. It encompasses all of Lewis County and a little bit of Cowlitz County. As you know, Lewis County is, well, maybe you don't know this, but it's a very conservative place. We had West Virginia numbers when it came to Donald Trump. I think we had 67% of our county voted for Donald Trump. In 2016, I pulled out my ballot, and there were 3 Republicans running for the state legislature, the Senate and the state legislature. All three were unopposed, all 3 Republicans. And Senator John Braun, who was elected, spent about $5,000 maybe on his campaign and was able to write the budget for the state. That's unacceptable. And I said to myself from that moment on, I said, we need to find someone who's going to run. I wasn't going to run. I'm too busy. I like my job. But a young man showed up out of nowhere. He's 27 years old, named Brennen Bailey. And he's a local. He's a 5th-generation Lewis County person who's, his family goes way back. And since the age of 18, he has raised money for food banks. He has ran a 500-mile, or he walked a 500-mile walk to raise money for STEM education. He became, at 18, he also bought his own real estate company. After a few years, he decided to go into teaching. He's been a teacher in Toledo and in Cowlitz County. And then he decided he wanted to get into education leadership at age 21. He got on the Chehalis School Board. and started working towards his master's in educational leadership at Harvard, and he's working on presently a PhD at Capella University in educational leadership. He's done a lot for his age. He's 27 now, and he's has a big heart, has a lot of compassion, but he's also very aggressive and ambitious. He's got a lot of energy, and that's what we need down in where I live. Because where I live, Democrats don't run, okay? There are a couple of Democrats, but they don't even call themselves Democrats. They run as Republicans or say nothing, okay? And that needs to change, okay? And he's stepping forward, and he's got a fairly moderate message. It's not focused on party, which I think is smart for our county. It's focused on rural communities because he sees the problems in the rural communities. When you're raising money for food banks, you see that those shelves are clearing off. There are people down in these rural communities. It is not like Seattle. It's not even like Olympia. It is rough out there. I don't know if you've been out there and you've seen some of these. They're really struggling. I've taught in Winlock. I've taught in different areas that, you know, it's tough. The kids are really struggling out there. The schools are struggling. Toledo is struggling, okay? That school district cannot get a levy to save their life, and that building's falling apart, okay? So he's running for those communities, and he wants to create green tech jobs down there, which I think is awesome, because that's actually why I got on board with him, because he was interested in creating green tech. I think Lewis County is primed for that kind of business, okay? And the reason is you've got Portland, you've got Seattle, and then you got Lewis County, okay? Cheap land, you got a college that will back up any industry you bring in there. They will back you up and train people. It's what we need down there, and I think it's a bipartisan thing. I think the Republicans, jobs, good family, blue-collar jobs, they will go for that. So I'm supporting Brennen Bailey because we need a lot of young, new, progressive energy down there, okay? Thank you very much, and I hope those people will vote for him.
All right, hello. Unfortunately, I'm not Justice Gonzalez. He's currently teaching a Washington constitutional law class at Gonzaga, so he really wanted to be here. He sent me instead, so I'm sorry. But I'm currently serving as a law clerk for Justice Gonzalez, and it's a really fun job. I get to interact with him a lot, and so he wanted me to come speak on his behalf, answer any questions about himself that you guys have or his jurisprudence, and hopefully I can answer those to the best of my ability. So before joining the Supreme Court, Justice Gonzalez worked as a trial court judge in King County for 10 years. Before that, he served as an assistant United States prosecutor, United States attorney, prosecuting international terrorism cases and hate crime cases. He also worked as a domestic violence prosecutor for the city of Seattle. Before that, he worked in private practice where he did a lot of pro bono work, and all of that work really shapes how he views the law, how he thinks about his decision making, and I think is a really diverse experience that he brings to the court. And his legal experience has not gone unnoticed. He's been, sorry, I want to make sure I get this correct. He has been rated exceptionally well qualified for the Supreme Court by 10 bar associations in Washington, including Washington Women Lawyers and the newly formed Veterans Bar Association. He received Outstanding Judge of the Year award from various organizations, including the Washington State Bar Association. He has also received broad bipartisan support from former governors Christine Gregoire, Gary Locke, Attorney General Bob Ferguson, Secretary of State Kim Wyman. In 2014, he received the Goldmark Distinguished Service Award for the Legal Foundation of Washington for his work in co-founding the Task Force on Race and the Criminal Justice System. Obviously, our political climate has really mobilized people to be engaged and to be active in all of politics at every level, so nationally, locally. But unfortunately, judicial races are still very low information races. And I highlight all of the work that he's done, all the great work and diverse work that he's done, but it's still important to think about how little people are actively involved in judicial races. So as some of you might know, back in 2012, when he originally ran for his position, he became the first candidate with a Latino surname to be elected to statewide office in Washington. He had an opponent in that race, an attorney from Kitsap County who did not campaign at all, did not attend any of these events, did not go to meet with the Seattle Times editorial board, pretty much did nothing. But he still ended up winning 29 counties. Only 4 counties at the time were provided with voter pamphlets. So only 4 counties actually had information that detailed Justice Gonzalez's work. He won in those counties plus 6 other counties. So he ended up winning a total of 10 counties, but he still lost 29 counties in those counties where they were going just off name alone. And so I tell that story only to highlight the importance of getting informed and voting in these judicial races. While he has immense experience and is extremely well qualified for the position, his re-election is not guaranteed. Candidates don't file formally until May, but there is currently a judge in Yakima who has been campaigning. So it's important to think about that and to get informed about this race. To think about all the great work that Justice Gonzalez has done. Hopefully I can answer all of your questions that you guys have about his work and his jurisprudence. I personally feel extremely fortunate to have him as a decision maker and as my boss. Yeah, and so I hope I can answer all your questions and you guys can understand his work a little bit better.
All right, thank you very much. So now we're going to move on to the first question, which is the same question we asked of the other candidates. What do you believe are the 3 most important issues affecting your jurisdiction, and how will you address them?
Wow, just 3, okay.
You have 2 minutes. I will let you know when you have 1 minute left.
Okay, so obviously education is very important to me. I think not only safety, but also making sure that we are supporting our teachers and supporting our schools. So this so-called fully funding of schools, I don't think is really fully funding schools the way that they need to be funded. Eatonville is one great example where now some children who live farthest from the district now don't have transportation. And so parents are going to have to transport their children on their own. And that's not what public school is intended to do. I understand maybe expanding it the other way where people maybe have to walk a little bit further if they're within walking distance, but not taking transportation from the farthest away. And then also, I don't have the specific numbers stuck in my head and I don't want to misquote them, but on my website I do have some information on how teachers' pay has been going down relative to other positions in their same education bracket, and that's really a disservice. So education is a really big one. Equality is another huge one to me, and that encompasses housing, food, healthcare, criminal justice. I could write an entire dissertation on that alone, so I will leave it at that. And then the last really big issue to me is the environment. So that is one of the issues that actually got me to run. My husband's Native American, and we wanted to take our children fishing, and we couldn't go to any of the places that he grew up fishing because all of the bait fish were toxic. So we didn't want to be bringing toxic fish home, and it doesn't seem like anyone is really addressing those issues. So.
Ready? I'm going to try to get this all in. There's so many. Our campaign leads with Medicare for All, expanding Social Security, and debt-free college. However, if I had to pick the top 3, in order to get all of that legislation passed, we have to deal with the #1 problem that faces Congress today. Yes, Sandy Aslavy. We have to get money out of politics. We have to remove the avenue of lobbyists to influence our Congress. Until we do that, we will never get any legislation that's actually going to affect the people. So, one, campaign finance reform, getting money out of politics. #2, electoral reform. We have to address our broken election system. A, through open source systems, blockchain, and paper ballots. All three of those things, I forgot to mention, I'm on the board of Election Justice USA. So that trifecta, dealing with open source, which makes it unhackable, blockchain. If anyone tries to tamper with our elections, it's seen and they're not able to do it. Paper ballots, hand counted at the precinct level with a strict chain of custody with CCTV surveillance. So all three of those things will make it impossible for our elections to be tampered with, and so you can be secure that your vote is counted as cast. Quickly, in the last 30 seconds, I'm going to say something local here. The homeless issue. I am really excited and inspired to create, I just saw recently, they have 3D printing of homes now for $4,000 for an 800 square foot home that could be done in 24 hours. So I'd love to talk more about that, but ideas like that that actually affect the people that live in our district, people's actual lives, changing them for the better. So thank you.
Well, since I'm speaking not for myself, but for Brennen, I'll keep it short, but also add a couple of things about his campaign. But first, I would say sustainable jobs, living wage jobs in our rural communities would be the first thing. Supporting small businesses. He's a big supporter of small local businesses in our communities, which tend to be rural, and having equity in education across the state, which of course the state is working on. The other thing I wanted to mention is that he is also a strong supporter for overturning Citizens United, even though he's in the State House, or going to the State House, we hope. He's only taking small donations. He's not taking any corporate money, and as opposed to his opponent. So that's where he stands with his campaign as far as local elections. He feels very strongly about that. So he's just taking small donations. All right, thank you.
All right. So for Justice Gonzalez, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So for Justice Gonzalez, the biggest issue before him is making sure and ensuring that the laws that are passed in Washington State are constitutional, that judges aren't abusing their discretion, that prosecutors aren't abusing their discretion, that defendants get their due process in court. So kind of more high-level issues and things that he has to be committed to. Also, throughout his career, he's been committed to equal access to justice. He heads the Interpreter Commission, which ensures that all the trial courts have interpreters, and so people that don't speak English are able to understand their rights, are able to understand what's happening to them in the courtroom. And so those sort of issues that affect real people are really important to him. Thinking about issues of justice and making decisions that are thoughtful and empathetic, he's committed to that as well. Yeah, and so that's pretty much it for that question. Yeah, I'll wait for the next one.
Thank you very much. This is a question from the audience for all of you, so you'll just pass the microphone. How do you propose we deal with the rise of racism and hate crimes in Washington State, and specifically in your local areas that you're going to represent?
Okay, I really like this question because I am a trained social worker. I went to the University of Washington, Seattle. And this is an issue actually that's happening in the Bethel School District right now. It's a problem, and it's something that I have witnessed firsthand because my husband is Native American and my family is brown to everyone that sees us. I think that there's a lot of things that we need to do. First of all is I went to school in a very diverse district, and I never learned anything about diversity or racism until I got to the University of Washington. That's a problem. You know, most of my friends actually do not look phenotypically white, and yet I was never introduced to all of the ways that they experience life that's so different from me until I actually got to college. This is not something that children are unaware of. My 3-year-old told me, "Mommy, am I brown?" I said, "Yes, you are." She said, "Mommy, am I white?" I said, "Yes, you are." So, as 3 years old, her recognizing that, it's not something that we can ignore or hide, and we need to be more purposeful in the way that we address these issues. We also really need to work with community policing. I think that the way that police right now are addressing communities is not effective. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of internal biases. We all have internal biases, and that's not bad. Ignoring them and acting like they don't exist, that's bad, because that's when bad things happen. And I believe that police overall want to do a good job. I don't think that people go into that career and say that they want to do harm. But in scary situations, when they have biases that they are not addressing, it causes very scary situations for everyone involved. And so I think we need to train police officers and give them the support that they need in order to overcome those situations. But racism impacts every single level of our society. And if we ignore it, it's only going to get worse.
So, by definition, racism is prejudice plus power. So, for instance, you all may have heard one of the latest incidences that happened in a Starbucks recently. 2 African-American gentlemen were there to meet a friend. They wanted to wait to order something until he came. The Starbucks barista got nervous because they were there not ordering anything and called 911, which subsequently resulted in the 2 real estate brokers, mind you, being handcuffed and arrested. Until 2 that morning, they were held. Now, that, of course, has raised a huge viral outcry. Now, Starbucks has come out today saying that their 190,000 some odd employees will go under a race or diversity training, which, of course, is the thing to do. But I agree with Anneliese, there has to be education, cultural education, because we have to combat systemic racism, systemic in our culture. We cannot tolerate either those that are working in establishments, especially our police officers. Our police officers should be peace officers. And so anything less than that, we, the people, cannot tolerate any other human being being treated less than what we would expect each other to be treated. If we see it, we have to stand up. We have to let our voice be heard, that it's not all right, and we have to demand that those things are implemented so we can actually have that be just a bad memory that we all share in common. Thank you.
Coming from Lewis County, I'm going to tell you a quick story. Last summer, there was a place called Morton. You may know it. It's up in the mountains. They have a Loggers Jubilee. It's huge, okay? And they had a parade. And actually, Brennen was in that parade. It was very early on in his campaign. And another friend of mine was running for city council of Morton. But what happened was there was a float, and it said, it was a Trump float, the truck, and there were some, fake dead animal heads hanging out of the window, and there was a big Confederate flag. And that was offensive enough, okay? It really was offensive enough. What was most offensive is that they won the first prize, okay? So what happened was there are several people in Lewis County, individual activists, wrote letters to the paper, went to the city council, made it a very public thing, and they had to answer to that. They had to say something. They kind of closed ranks, quite honestly. But there were a lot of people that came out and said, it was sponsored by a tavern, by the way. It was a lot of people came out and said, we won't go there anymore. It's not acceptable. And so it's something that is slowly changing in a place like where I live. But I think a lot of it has to do with public education, bringing people down, showing kids that there is a bigger world out there and that the things they hear maybe at home may not be true. They just may be prejudices that they're hearing and they just don't understand. So the more that they see at school in terms of diversity and understanding that there is a much bigger world out there, the better off the kids will be to go off into the world. Thank you.
All right. As I mentioned earlier, my judge, Justice Gonzalez, has been committed to equal access to the courts and to the justice system throughout his career. So that's something right there. He's also been committed to training judicial officers, people in the legal community about implicit bias. And I think when we look at the criminal justice system especially, but different ways that the system as a whole, the legal system, impacts people and disparately people of color, it's really important to have that training that you guys were addressing, making sure that people who are in decision-making positions are aware of their implicit biases, how that affects their decision-making, and the judge has been committed to that, has been committed to thinking about how to better rectify the systems and how they impact people of color. The Supreme Court just recently released a court rule that addresses diversity in juries, and so it makes it harder now to remove a juror without showing that it's not based on race. And so that's really good because there's a lot of studies that show that diverse juries really do lead to more empathetic results and verdicts, and so that's something that's really great that the court has done.
Okay, thank you very much.
In my opinion, Justice Gonzalez is the best justice on the Supreme Court. I don't agree with every decision that he's been part of, particularly Davis versus Cox, which I really don't like. But he is really an amazing individual. But I want to emphasize something that happened in 2012 when he first ran. He mentioned that he won Thurston County, but against a vastly inferior opponent, Justice Gonzalez got only 56% of the vote. There was a comparable race against one of his colleagues in which the sitting justice got 64%, somewhere in that range. So there is a very strong chance, even with an inferior opponent like this, that we could lose one of the best justices we have on the Supreme Court. In addition, you should know that his opponent has the unique qualification that he's one of the only people to run for the Supreme Court who, within the last year, has been sanctioned for judicial misconduct.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, so this question is going to be for all the panel members. Same question we asked to the last panel. What specific plans do you propose to address income inequity and social inequality in our society and your jurisdiction?
Okay, so this is actually a huge one for me too. I don't know if you're all aware of it. We are the #1 most regressive tax state in the nation, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And I have some really great graphs on my website. Go to votefeld.com. There's a great paper there that explains it very well of why we are the most regressive tax state. And pretty much it's because we rely so heavily on sales and income tax. So if you are in the, not income tax, I'm sorry, sales and excise tax, not excise tax. We want income tax. The reason for that is because if you look at how taxes would be adjusted for who would be paying the most if we switch to an income tax, it would flop, right? So right now, the bottom 20% are paying 16.8% tax just in state taxes on their income, whereas the top 1% is paying 2.4%, and the middle 60% is still paying over 10% of their income. This would completely flop if we went to an income tax, and I know that that has failed in the past, but there was a fatal flaw in how they proposed it, because our Washington State Constitution says that we need to tax all people equally. So I would like to, if I'm elected, make the argument that we are actually violating our Constitution right now because we are not taxing all people equally. If we want to do that, we need to go to an income tax. And it's not impossible to do. States like Kansas have actually done major changes to their tax structure very recently. And I think the Republicans are really scared about this possibility because just this year, they tried to pass legislation that would ban an income tax. So I think that they know that people are upset about the taxes. We could get a lot more revenue if we made it more equitable, and that would be the #1 thing that I would do.
When I was growing up in the 70s, a two-income household, or even just say there was one breadwinner, and there was the mother that stayed home and took care of the family, on that one income could have a nice home, 2 cars, a 2-week vacation, money in the bank if there was ever an emergency. So the difference between then and now, CEOs' salaries have increased 793%, while salaries, regular salaries, have gone up 5%, but you're not taking into account the cost of living adjustment. So, we have to have a living wage. The minimum wage at 15, that's like minimum. You know, that's not, in my opinion, a living wage. If you were to do a living wage, it would be at least $21 at this point, based on inflation. I also would fiercely protect and fight against any right to work legislation because contrary to the misleading name, it is not about workers. It's about stripping their right to unionize, which we all know unions were the backbone of the middle class. And so I would be a proponent and advocate to strengthen unions, but here's the main thing. Corporations, the fact here in Washington state that we have all of these multi-billion-dollar corporations that pay nothing. Amazon, $1 trillion they take in and pay nothing. We have billionaires today that the world's billionaires, $642 billion came in, which would take care of poverty, the most impoverished among us, 7 times over. I would eliminate that completely. So I'm out of time, so I would love to talk much more about that, but thank you so much.
I know Brennen on his literature, and I know I know why he does this. He has made it very clear he does not support an income tax. I've actually had a conversation with him about it. I actually supported a graduated income tax, but he does want to give tax breaks to small businesses, especially local businesses down where we live, so they have a chance. I live in Chehalis, and it's what Tamborine was talking about as far as the corporations. It's very apparent what's going on there. You drive down the freeway, and you look, if you're heading south, you look on the right, you see Walmart, you see all the corporate restaurants, all the corporate stuff there. Get off the freeway, go downtown, you see a lot of empty spaces, okay? You see old pictures of Chehalis back in the 50s and 60s. There was a Sears, there was a hardware store, there was a Five and Dime. It was thriving. There's cars everywhere, and there's people, you know, keeping those dollars local. And the people that lived there and ran those businesses and owned those businesses, worked at those businesses, lived in that town, okay? Those dollars were circulating right there. Now all those dollars are going over to Walmart. I guarantee you Walmart collects more from our community than all the other businesses combined. Okay, that's wrong, because those dollars are going out. They're out of there. So that's what he's trying to promote, is getting small businesses locally supported by the state. Thank you.
In terms of economic equity, Justice Gonzalez is sort of limited based on what cases come before the court, the facts of that case. All the cases that come before the court are pretty nuanced. And like I said, he's really thoughtful in his decision making. So it's a very legal answer, but it depends on the case. But he has been committed to looking, and the court has been committed to looking at the financial obligations that are imposed on criminal defendants. Victor sort of mentioned this earlier in the first forum about how there are financial consequences to being involved in the criminal justice system. And the court has considered and is looking at those legal financial obligations and thinking about how fair those are and how just those are. And so not a definitive answer on either way how the judge feels on that, but that's something that the court is often considering. And in terms of workers' unions, the justice, among other worker unions that I can't list off the top of my head, but I do know that he was endorsed by the Central Puget Sound Carpenters Local Union 30 and the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, District Council 5. So he's constantly speaking to different communities. He's traveling everywhere. I don't even know how he does it, but he's always talking to people. A lot of people support him. He does good work. Yeah.
And this is another question from the audience for each of you. What would be your position on passing legislation on stricter gun laws, and what would you call it? What would you name it?
So, off the top of my head, I would want to say gun protection. And I think one of the biggest things that we should do is when you look at how we treat food service workers, you have to go improve your knowledge on food safety because you don't want to harm other people. When you get a license, you have to go prove your knowledge of how to drive because you could hurt other people. We should be treating guns the same way. There should be no bipolar, there shouldn't be opposite ends of the spectrum on that one. That's just kind of common things. We're not taking everybody's guns away. We're just saying prove your competency so that way you can be safe. And also, no one needs an automatic weapon. We're not in a war zone. So.
Let's see. Sometimes it's simplistic and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I do agree with common sense ideology as it pertains to guns. I do believe that it just makes sense. For instance, what we have to go through to get a driver's license. It's reasonable. I find that most, personally, the gun owners that I know are reasonable people that don't have a problem with that type of requirement, as it should be. Because just as a car could kill someone, so could obviously a gun. I just wanted to just do a caveat to
20 seconds.
Oh, well, there's no way I'm going to be able to get that out. So I hope I conveyed my opinion on that sufficiently. Thank you. As I said, not to reinvent the wheel, common sense, gun law.
I'll start off by saying I don't know what Brennen would call his legislation, but I'll just say that he definitely would say enforce the laws and require training, and nobody needs automatic weapons, quite honestly. Have strict requirements on that. That's all I'm going to say about it, because I don't know what else he would say about it.
All right. Similarly, I can't really speak to that because that is an issue that comes before the court quite a bit. But I will just reiterate something that I said earlier, that the judge's main goal and job description is to consider the constitutionality of any legislation that the state passes. And so if the state does pass some gun reform law, I'm sure that it will come before the court and you will hear his opinion if you reelect him. I can't speak on his behalf, unfortunately, about that issue, and I don't want to say anything that is a misstatement of his belief on that. And yeah, so I'm sorry about that, but yeah, if you reelect him, you'll find out.
Don't sit down. This question is specifically for Justice Gonzalez. What is his opinion, or what is his feeling and his work regarding balancing in sentencing for race same crimes?
For hate crimes?
Yes. So for sentencing for race.
Sentencing for crime, it's the same crime.
Oh, the disparate sentences? Yeah.
Sentences,
Mhm.
same crime, different rate.
I think generally he's appalled and concerned about the disparate impacts of the criminal justice system and the different sentencing. That's as much as I can say about that. I think he has shown his commitment, and if you read some of his cases, looking at different ways that the criminal justice system affects people of color. So like I mentioned, juries. He has an opinion in the case called St. Cali, State versus St. Cali, which is a really robust opinion about all the things that I mentioned about the benefits of having a diverse jury. So that sort of goes to that. Yeah, I mean, it's something that is very concerning, I think, for all of the justices and for the court, and trying to rethink and fix this really broken system and trying to reimagine how to sentence people in an equitable way.
Okay, this is a question from the audience for Anneliese and Tamborine. What are the major ways in which your views diverge from the incumbent? And then, then I'm going to add just quickly for Anneliese. Yeah, yes, two. Okay, yeah, two major ways. Okay, and maybe Anneliese, can you also describe what your district boundaries are and what cities are included as part of that answer? Thanks.
Okay, so first of all, with the boundaries, so we start out in Ording, go up to Graham, parts of South Hill, all the way back to Mount Rainier, southern encompasses Eatonville, LB, out towards Roy, Yelm, Lacey, and parts of Olympia. So very big, expansive district, very different pockets of people. Wow, two ways that I differ. Can I just say everything? I believe in equality for people. I believe that all people should be valued equally. And I believe that people should be represented in our district, not corporations or interests outside of our district, because if I'm elected, I am elected by the people in my district. So I am not trying to seek out a lot of money from outside of the district. I am not trying to protect antique car museums, for one that comes to the top of my head, because we don't have an antique car museum. I'm not against them, but the interests of my district are very different than Tacoma, Seattle, or other areas, and I think that they deserve as much representation as anyone else.
Whoever asked that question, I want to personally thank you for giving me the opportunity to make this case. So first, let me tell you, CD10 encompasses all of Thurston County. It reaches up and just grabs Shelton out of Mason, and it juts over and encompasses Pierce County, Lakewood. It has JBLM in it, Sumner, 5 Puyallup, comes down into Roy, and so it's quite diverse. So, no, some, parts of it. So, the most important ways I would say that I differ from the incumbent. A, I do not take any corporate PAC money, nor will I ever. Denny Heck, 93% of all of his campaign donations come from very large individual donations and mostly corporate PAC donations. Big oil, big insurance, big pharma. Another important way is that I would fiercely protect our privacy. Heck has voted recently against the Amash Amendment, which would have protected us, the regular people who are suspicionless, from warrantless surveillance. That means our phone calls, our emails, now are free reign for the intelligence communities to just listen in when they want to. And most importantly, I will end with this. Medicare for all, I believe, is the first and foremost important issue of our country at the moment, single-payer health care. And Representative Heck is adamantly against single-payer health care, expanding Social Security, and debt-free college. Thank you.
In a sentence, what is the most powerful tool at your disposal if you are elected to change the course of what's happening in your districts or in your areas?
I'll keep it short. Collaboration with the other justices, thinking thoughtfully and empathetically about the decisions that come before the court.
A progressive Democrat in the 20th LD for the first time in at least 2 decades.
Courage to stand up in the face of Goliath, conviction to not give up, and compassion, which Congress is in desperate need of.
I would say the power of all the people in my district who I feel like have not been represented in a long time. Just being able to be that voice and rallying all of our district together to make people accountable in Olympia for the decisions that they are making.